Donald Trump and Joe Biden head-to-head in their first presidential debate. The two spent much of the 90 minutes talking over each other, the president interrupting his opponent with aggressive and at times personal attacks. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. Thank you for joining us for this analysis of that that presidential debate. It was a moment the two men had been waiting for over a year. Donald Trump and Joe Biden met on the stage in Cleveland, Ohio for their first of what will be 3 presidential debates. Moderator Chris Wallace of Fox News was left pleading with the president to stop interrupting his opponent. Trump and Biden demonstrating their different styles as they clashed on racial justice, the Supreme Court, and the handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Let's take a listen now to one of their exchanges on health care.
You agreed with Bernie Sanders on a plan.
Folks,
absolutely
folks, do you have any idea what this clown's doing?
They call it
Mr. Do you have any idea?
Socialized medicine.
Mr. President. I'll tell you what, he is not for any help for people needing health care. Because he, in fact, already has cost 10 million people their health care that they had from their employers because of his recession. Number one. Number two, there are 20 million people getting health care through Obamacare now that he wants to take it away. He won't ever look you in the eye and say that's what he wants to do. Take it away.
No, I want to give him better health care at a much lower price because
by the way,
Obamacare
he doesn't
is
know
no
how.
good.
He doesn't know how
I've
to do
already
that.
Fixed it.
He has never
I've
offered a plan.
fixed it to an extent.
He has never done a
as
single
you might
thing.
know, but.
All right, well, to kick off our analysis of the debate, we can cross to our correspondent, Ketavan Gorjestani, who is in Cleveland, Ohio. Ketavan, this was a very messy debate to follow. Did any policy issues actually manage to stick out to you?
Well, it was mostly former Vice President Joe Biden who tried at times to bring back the discussion towards policy, but mostly it was really a back and forth between the president, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. They exchanged attacks on everything from healthcare, the Supreme Court, COVID-19, the economy, all of that kind of buried the policy even when Joe Biden was trying to say these things. And mostly Joe Biden, what he tried to do when he was not talking about policy was trying to talk directly to the American people. We saw him multiple times talking straight into the camera, while we saw the president of the United States either attacking Joe Biden directly or talking to Chris Wallace, the moderator. And there were a couple of powerful moments when Joe Biden turned to the camera and said, for example, on COVID-19, which was probably the segment where he did the best against the president, he turned to the camera and said, how many of you back at home are sitting at the kitchen table and have an empty chair, talking, of course, about those more than 200,000 deaths here in the United States. He also did something quite similar on the economy when Donald Trump was bragging about how he was bringing back the economy after the coronavirus crisis. And Joe Biden turned to the camera again and said, are you doing, you folks back at home, how are you doing economically? So that's what he tried to do. Policy-wise, he was not the policy guy that he's come to be known as in the United States over the years. It was something that he did a lot during the Democratic primary. He was focusing, sometimes critics said, too much on the nitty-gritty details of policy. This time, he went completely to the opposite, really barely making any real policy points.
All right, Ketavan, thank you very much. We're going to ask you to stay with us for this analysis, but for now we're going to move into the studio where I'm joined by France 24's Armin Georgian, our international affairs editor, and Nita Wiggins, professor at ESG Paris and author of the book Civil Rights Baby. Thank the two of you for staying with us for this debate night. Nita, let's start with you. What were some of your main takeaways from this debate?
Well, as I said when we sat down an hour and a half ago, that I wanted politeness and respect. Instead, we got ugliness. And let me just explain what my view is about why there was such ugliness in the discussion about health care. Because in the United States, to have a national health care plan that covers the American people, it means that white people in America are on the same level as African Americans, Native Americans, Asian, all types of people in the United States. And before the National Health Plan, that did not exist because people had to get their health care either from their employer or purchase their health care. And so when we see that repeatedly, the Republican Party has challenged Obamacare, the national health program, in court. It is simply because, in the mindset of some part of the American public, some people don't want all of the ethnic groups to have the same access to health care. That is why it is so incendiary, and that is why health care is coming up again when the Supreme Court goes back to work. It's a racial issue in regard to health care and keeping the white population separated and above the other populations in the United States. It's where we are right now as a country.
Yeah, Biden also, there was a moment he sort of did try to bring in the racial element into the discussion of COVID-19. Can you talk about some of the race issues surrounding that issue, and how did Biden do on that topic?
Well, as far as COVID-19 and the people who are either obese or who have asthma or other respiratory challenges, those people, as we now know, are at a particular risk from COVID-19. And because of housing patterns that still remain segregated because of income, we have communities of color that are in those areas that either have chemicals in the water or that have lower quality air, and that does make people of color more at risk for COVID-19. And the vice president did address that. But again, this is not a new issue. Those health issues that are now tied into COVID, these health issues have not been addressed, and the health discrepancies. And even Mrs. Clinton talked about your zip code for your physical mailing address. Your zip code should not determine your level of health or your life expectancy. But we see with COVID-19, yes, your zip code in some cases does still determine your health outcomes.
Let's stay on the topic of the coronavirus because Kedevin was saying she thought that was one of the areas where Biden performed the best. Armin, what did you think about his performance in that area, or is there another topic that you think he did better on?
I was going to just say something to build a bit on what you were saying on the racial issues. Just one passage I found really interesting, that when Trump was talking about, because he was challenged on this, ending bias training. For police, right? Was that it? For someone else?
For employers at schools and in society. That bias training is unnecessary.
This is something that it's something that Trump didn't, because there is a conservative. There's actually an argument in favor of not having this kind of training, right? That the conservatives will explain there is a philosophy behind it, and when it relates to, for example, police, how should police react in certain situations? And what conservatives would say is that police have instincts to deal with a dangerous situation, and that they would need to essentially focus on the danger and the nature of the danger, rather than let's say the skin color of the people in that situation. And so this is a whole kind of philosophy which it's obviously something one can debate, but it's something that Trump didn't really expand on. It was a very truncated sort of mishmash, and his inability to kind of articulate those things has been a real source of frustration to the right, actually. So I think, we just have this kind of impression that, whatever Trump says, it's just kind of throwing things out to his base that they will like. But there's a lot of things that actually need to be better explained and kind of debated more fully. And again, this goes back to what we said before in this whole debate. It was just throwing out disjointed bits here and there that didn't kind of make sense intellectually. But all I'm saying is I kind of knew what Trump was referring to when he says this bias training is itself racist. I know what the backdrop is to that, but it wasn't kind of fleshed out in any way.
Yeah, Armin, as you were saying, we saw lots of sort of half ideas sort of thrown out to see what would stick in this debate. I want to cross back over to Ketavan, because Ketavan, you've been covering these elections for us. You're in the United States. You've been talking to voters. I'm curious how you think people are going to be reacting to this debate. Are there any takeaways? How are people going to feel about it?
Well, probably for most of American voters who have mostly already made up their minds, it's not going to change much because the country is extremely divided. All the people I've been speaking to in the past few months have been either pro-Trump or pro-Biden, or maybe more anti-Trump than pro-Biden, but there are very distinct groups in this country. And for the pro-Trumps, no matter what he says, they go for it. They are behind their president. And the same goes for the Democrats. They have this time, maybe differently than in 2016, this time they all have rallied behind Joe Biden. They have decided that they no longer want Donald Trump in power, and therefore they're backing Joe Biden no matter what he does. Where the possibility of changing minds lies is, of course, in that small group of independents, of swing voters, of people who haven't yet made up their minds. Remember, back in 2016, the election was extremely close. So whoever wins maybe that fringe at the margin in the center, whoever managed to maybe convince or possibly deter some voters, that's where it's going to play. And this is why these debates matter, because some people still have not made up their minds. And maybe by watching this debate and the two that are coming, and including the vice presidential debate, maybe that will be changing the minds of an extremely divided country again. It is very, very divided here between those who support the president and those who are opposed to him.
That's right. Incredibly divisive situation in the United States. Hard to imagine what impact this debate is going to have to change things. We were talking earlier about how sort of the civility level, the level of fighting between Donald Trump and Joe Biden would be sort of a measure of who was winning the debate. Do either of you have a sense that someone won this debate, or was it simply too messy to call?
Well, the phrase that I use is listen to others as you would have them listen to you. It's the golden rule, right? Just insert listening, and we didn't really see that. And again, what happens is that people who need an answer, who are trying to make a decision, they're not getting information when there is no listening to the other. And it goes back again to that racial sensitivity training. When one can listen to someone who is different, there can be movement toward more civility, more understanding, and maybe even political solutions. But that's not where we are now. It's possible. I'm going to be optimistic when I leave here today. So it is possible, and politeness is possible the next time we have a debate. And let's just see if the rest of the political season can catch up to my optimism about what these two candidates can do.
Armin, how is your optimism level after this debate?
Well, it's pretty low. I mean, I totally agree with what you said about people are not getting the information, and it was absolutely a brawl. I suppose in a very narrow sense, you could say if we're going to play the game of, who won or lost the debate or whatever, I think Joe Biden might get a few brownie points for hitting back, more than he has done in previous debates, because he was certainly on the losing end of exchanges in the primaries, no question about that. And so he did hit back. He didn't. He didn't have any really major stumbles, no obvious senior moment. But I think so in that sense, I think he might have exceeded expectations depending on where you think the bar was put for him in the first place. But I think he was also a bit, I think, the fact that he gave this very kind of vague speech at the end of the Democratic convention about I am light and Donald Trump is darkness. It's a real problem when you set yourself up in that sort of dynamic, because you can't then really come up with these policy solutions, fresh ideas, fresh perspectives. And I felt it was more essentially a continuation of that, light versus darkness, which is not a choice. It's not a political choice.
Certainly a continuation of the arguments they've already been making on social media, but on the debate stage this time. We'll have to wait and see if the next two debates bear more policy than that. In the meantime, Nita Wiggins, Armin Georgian, thank you very much for this debrief of what is possibly the messiest debate in U.S. presidential history. Thank all of you for joining us. Do stay tuned with us here on France 24.